see the question that's behind your eyes, or you're searching for your peace of mind. Now listen up to this truth. You are me and I am you. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. I know your life, I felt your pain.
Hey everyone, welcome, welcome.
Shame. Sometimes it feels like
We'll get started in a couple minutes. We're just going to give a couple more minutes and we'll get started.
penny on the ground. But either on the ground or in your purse, the smallest piece still holds its worth. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. Worthy of love, worthy of life, worthy of saying no when something don't feel right. This is a song for you, for all the ups and downs that life will put you through. Oh, so listen up to this truth. You are me and I am you. Every one of us is worthy. Yeah, baby girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy.
Okay, we are going to get started. We have a packed agenda today. So we're going to get started. Thank y'all for those of you that sent in questions beforehand. Thank y'all so much. My name is Leah Whitehurst Gibson. For those of you that I don't know and haven't met, thank y'all for being here and for this, really important conversation, but it's also, we want it to be a dialogue. So these first Wednesday's conversations and meetings are really about just trying to have a space for people who are doing work, community-led work, community-engaged work on a regular basis, to just have a space of like-minded people to ask questions, to engage, to learn from each other, to have kind of that space. And whatever, I'm always very clear that we at Virginia Community Voice are a work in progress. We are always learning. We're always trying to grow and trying to do better than we did the day before. But whatever learnings we can offer on this journey that we're all trying to kind of embark on, we want to have to hold space for that. So thank you guys again for being here, and really appreciate just the interest in the topic. So because we have such a packed agenda, I do want to get to it. So I'm going to turn it over to Flo. She's going to do a grounding exercise for us, just to kind of get our bodies and minds kind of in the space and focused on kind of what we're talking about. Sometimes when we come to things like this, we've got a bunch of other things going on, a lot of other things happening, but we always try to just ground ourselves in this moment, so we can be as present as possible. And then, from here, take whatever we learn and engage with to the next moment that we're going to be in. So I'll turn it to Flo to give us some grounding, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Leah. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you very much for participating in this community and being part of, as Leah was saying, this journey of learning together how to be in community with more love, compassion, and equity. So thank you for that. I was going to do an exercise standing up for kind of body grounding, but I don't think I have it in me to kind of show the background here. So we're gonna, I have two little kids, as most of you know, so this house is a mess, but let's just stay in our seats. But I will ask for you to place both your feet on the ground. So wherever you're sitting, make sure that both the soles of your feet are touching the ground, the floor, whatever it is. And just kind of, try to sit as straight as possible without feeling any constraint in your body. And I'd like for you to focus on that aspect, just the soles of your feet on the ground And just really, really paying attention and focusing your awareness on your feet. And then just kind of letting go of tension and stress in that part of your body. Notice how they stand tall and carry us all throughout the day. And then I invite you to become aware of your shins and your knees and your thighs. Just kind of be aware that you're in this body, you know, just take a second to be aware that these legs carry you through the ground, through the floor, through wherever you're walking or being. And then just bring your awareness a little bit higher to your hips and your belly. Any constraints on your belly, I invite you to just kind of let it all go. Wiggling in your seat if you feel like it. Try to find that spot where your body is kind of aware and alert, but resting at the same time. Now I invite you to shift your awareness to your chest and your shoulders. Make sure you're standing tall and proud and at the same time comfortable and humble. Move your shoulders if it feels right and true for you. Take deep breaths in this process if it feels needed. Then shift your awareness to your throat. Just kind of wiggle your neck gently from side to side. If you feel called to do a little bit of kind of moving, rocking like I am side to side, then that's probably what your body needs right now. Then I invite you to just bring your awareness to your face and your head and let your intuition move your head however it wants to move. Relax your face. Relax your arms, your lungs. And if your eyes are open, I invite you to close them now and just continue to sit wherever you found that kind of comfortable yet alert position, and take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your nose. And release, try to release your tension and whatever you're holding on to in the exhale. And then one more. And release, and the last breath we're taking together. I invite you to release, and then slowly start wiggling your toes and wiggling your fingers, wiggling your face from side to side. And whenever you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes. Feel free to move your arms if you need to, yawn if you need to. And I invite you to come back so we can be together in this space.
Thanks, Flo. Thanks so much for that. I hope everyone feels a little bit more grounded, a little bit more present, a little bit more aware of how your body is feeling. I think it feels really important to know where we are so that we can understand kind of our responses and our engagement with whatever we're doing. And so body scanning is something that we've kind of become really accustomed to at the VACV, to make sure that we can be as present as possible. So for those of you who just came in a little bit later, my name is Leah Whitehurst Gibson. I am the Executive Director for Virginia Community Voice. And today we're going to be talking about, this is our third First Wednesday kind of conversation. And it's good to see some of you that I know, and some welcome to those of you that I have not met or that we have not had the pleasure of engaging with. But yeah, we really wanted to talk today about what does it look like? What is the process for engaging community in the work that we do? And so I have a few things just kind of, I would like to kind of talk through about our process, and then would really love to open it up for questions and for all of us to kind of talk about our experiences and things that we all have kind of, gone through in these processes. So just as I'm talking, maybe be thinking about a couple of these questions. Kind of what experiences have you had in creating groups, community-led groups or community engaged groups? Like what has that been like for you? What have you experienced? What problems have you run into? Any kind of troubleshooting that you want to think about or talk about in our question space? And like, what are the motivations? Like, why did you think that like having a community-led group was important? Like, what does that look like? We'll talk a little bit about our motivations for those things. And then think about like, what are the roles that they had within your organization, or have had, or still do have within your organization, and how you hope to be able to do this kind of work, and how all those things went maybe in the past or currently what you're going through in that creation. So be thinking about some of those questions as I'm talking, and then hopefully you'll have some really good feedback for me in this space. But before we keep going, I'd love if you all want to put your kind of name and organization into the chat and just let us know who's here. I can see many of your names, but it'd be great just for us to be able to keep a sense of like who's here. And yeah, so if you want to do that, we'd love to just kind of hear and see who's here. But as you all put your name and organization to the chat, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of background on the work that we do at Virginia Community Voice, and kind of why we have engaged with this model of community-led decision-making, and how this like plays out at Virginia Community Voice. And so like from our inception, my background is community organizing. I've been doing that for a dozen years. Welcome everyone. I'm looking at names in the chat and people, thank y'all so much for being here. Yeah, so I've been doing that for over a dozen years here in Richmond in various roles, but really kind of the premise behind that our work and our motivation for doing community engaged work is really that the community knows what they need, especially historically marginalized communities, right? So we primarily work, and most of my work over the last 12 years has been with communities that have been historically marginalized, Black, Brown, other marginalized groups, to say kind of, hey, we know that but we know that to actually see change on the things that we want to see change on, we have to come together. There has to be a united voice and united power, because a lot of times that change comes from a place of like, hey, I want to do something, and so you go and you try to advocate, but because of the marginalized like nature of the communities that we primarily work with, and the reason, for the same reasons that they have been kept away from the table, it's the same reason that one voice kind of trying to change something doesn't actually get a lot of traction, because we need that power, right? We need multiple voices, and there's power in the numbers together. And so that's really kind of why we start there. And then I think there's a lot of different spaces where we say, we're gonna be stronger if we can find consensus in the community, right? As opposed to, coalesce around one voice or a few voices and we leave out so many people, then when we do things, then you're going to have people saying, oh, well, you shouldn't have done it that way and you shouldn't have done it that way. If we can bring as many people to the table as possible, then we have a better chance of seeing that collective change and having multiple voices there. And so another thing is like ownership, right? We want long-term engagement in the work that we're doing. We want people to stay involved. And if they're not at the table making decisions about what's happening, they're not going to stay involved, right? Because they don't find any value in that. And so our process is a lot of spending time with community members before we even started doing work on the south side of Richmond, which is where we primarily work. I personally, with one of our board members, I did about 50 and one of my other board members did about 50. So we did 100 one-to-one conversations with people before we even started to think about what we could do. We asked them what they wanted. And what we hear a lot of times in these kinds of conversations is that's the real draw, is stopping to ask, because a lot of times what happens is you have people and organizations that come in and say, hey, we've done all the research, we've done all the data, we've gotten all the data, we know what's wrong with your community. Let me come in and put this program together and do this thing and use the data to lead where we go. And I'm not saying there's anything, we do a lot of data gathering, but we do it from a community space and a community lens. And so there's nothing wrong with data, but data used in the right way is really something that we think is really important. And I'll give you a quick example of what that looks like. So when we first started working on the corridor, we, on the Richmond Highway corridor in Richmond, I know some of you are not from Richmond, so you might not know, or from Virginia even, so you might not know the part of the community that we're talking about, but the Richmond Highway corridor is on Route 1, which for those who aren't from Virginia, Route 1 essentially runs from Maine all the way down to Florida and goes through kind of this part of Richmond, Virginia. And in this community, when we first came in, there was if we had looked at the data and we had done what the data say, we would have started an education program, because all of the data said, or data, whatever, said that, the high school graduation numbers were low, third grade reading scores were low. We know all of those things are indicators for like a thriving community, right? And so if we had done what the data said, we would have started a education program or some kind of like tutoring program or something on the corridor. But when we started to actually listen to the community and hear what they wanted, that wasn't on the list at all. Like nobody was saying anything about schools. Nobody was saying anything about education, not because they didn't care about those things, but because there were other pressing things in the community that they wanted to focus on first. And if we had gone down that route, we wouldn't have had the engagement that we did and the people show up for the work. And so that's another reason why it makes more sense to kind of start with community voice and then build your programming around that. And so that's just kind of one example of like why we do what we do and how kind of we think about it. And just when you think about kind of our philosophy for this work, we think about it kind of, we've used I use a bus analogy a lot, where a lot of times you come in as an organization and the organization is kind of driving the bus and we are, doing all the things and we're, going out and making everything happen. And while in the beginning, there is some of that, right? When you're first standing a program up or standing an organization up or whatever that, there's some of that like, hey, so we have practical things that we have to put together to make this organization work or this program work. But our goal is always, and Monty, if you want to put that first ownership slide up, that would be great. Our goal is always to have, to go from kind of this, and if you've been in our trainings, which I know some of you have, you've seen this slide before, where it's from kind of informed to ownership, right? This idea of like, hey, we can start, most organizations, most programs, most things that you do start with this information space. Like we're giving information, we're helping people understand what's going on. But where we want to get very quickly on this line is to this ownership space. And what we have seen, because we started with asking people what they want, and they know now that Virginia Community Voice, RVA Thrives, the programs that we run are community-led. Everything that we do, every program that we have, every space that we, everything that we've done in the community has been the community saying, we want to see this thing happen. And then us going and finding the resources, bringing the money, bringing whatever we need, because we're a nonprofit and we can leverage our power as a nonprofit to make sure that the things that the community wants get done. That is really what has happened. And so the more that we do that, the more that we build that trust with the community, and the more that the people in the community have said, hey, we want this thing, and then we go do it, the more they believe that we are people of our word, and then they begin to do that more. And so the ownership side of things is really where we want to be. An example of kind of how that has worked out for us is, several years ago when we first started on the corridor, we were holding these civic association meetings that were like community-wide. So like all the civic associations across the corridor, we would hold these meetings for everyone to kind of connect and get to know each other and do all of that. And once the pandemic started, we weren't doing those particular meetings as much, but the community still wanted to do that, and they found that valuable. And so they do those meetings without any direction from us or even involvement from us now, because they saw it as a value add to being connected across the corridor and using that connection to stand up for the issues that they find important and all of those things. And so that's an example. In our greeting work, like there's been so much work with just like, cleaning up the community, our cleanup days that community has taken ownership of. It started with us kind of organizing all of it. And we then went to a model where we had like captains in each community organizing our cleanup days. And now the community mostly does all of that on their own, and we just provide support and connection. And so those are the kinds of things where we say like, hey, we really want to get to ownership very quickly, to where people's voice and ideas, and then them taking over eventually. And so kind of when we think about that bus analogy, where we're not in the driver's seat, but then maybe we're further back, the goal is to be further and further and further back on the bus, where, maybe initially we're right behind the driver's seat. If someone needs to reach back and say, hey, we need money for this, we need resources for this, we need a map to go to figure out how to get this thing done, then we're there to support that. But the goal is that we're equipping, right? Our goal is to equip community to be able to do those things as much as possible themselves. So that's really kind of our model in the way that we kind of see our work. And there's lots of other things that I can say, but I do want to leave a good chunk of time for questions, because there's a lot that we have on this agenda and a lot that I can talk through, but I don't want to kind of dominate the conversation with me just talking at you all. I would love to hear kind of some of the questions that you all have. I'll start just to get started. So start thinking about questions that you might have, or conversation kind of starters. But there were a couple of questions that came in through a Google form when we set this up that I do want to address. One of them was, what's the ideal role of community partners / allies, particularly higher ed institutions, in community change work? For example, how do we best support the work of our VA Thrive steering committees and working groups, those are our RVA Thrive steering committee and working groups. Those are really our decision-making bodies, community-led decision-making bodies, where they kind of determine where we're going to go on a particular issue. We're always getting feedback from them, asking them, what we did well, what we didn't do well, where each of our issues are going to go. And our steering committee actually was the first committee to kind of decide what issues we were even going to work in. After we had 700 people take an initial kind of survey long ago, many moons ago, back far back in 2017, we had all these people take in the community because we could hire people from the community to go out and be a part of like engaging their neighbors on what they wanted. Again, that's another strategy to make sure that you're embedded in the community and the community is driving the decisions, is to make sure you're bringing people in and hiring people and paying people to be a part of understanding what their neighbors need and want. That's another really important strategy there. But those are the groups. Our steering committee and our working groups are the community-led decision-making bodies for all the work that we do. And they choose and they kind of help us guide and help direct whatever we do. So anyway, the question is, how could institutions, community partners, allies help push forward community change work? For an example, how can they support the work of Our Bay Thrives? So a couple of things that we've seen in that space. So I think, especially for higher ed places, what we've seen. So we've had some really good relationships with the Murph School. Monty, you can take that slide down now. With the Murph School, so the Masters of Urban Planning through VCU. We've had a lot of interaction with them in the past. And what we've seen is really helpful is providing resources, helping us with data, helping us kind of support the work that, so a lot of times, especially when we're talking about really hard issues, and one of the ways that, I think a lot of people ask, well, like, do you just do anything the community asks you to do? Is that like just what you do? What if they're asking you to do something that doesn't feel like the right direction, or that can be, whatever? I think the other piece that we bring to the table is education, right? And so learning from the community, the direction they want to go, but also trying to make sure that they have all the resources they need to make informed decisions about where we're going to go, right? And so one of those very real and present conversations that we're having right now with community is the conversation about what is the role of police in our space, right? So we're having these conversations regularly, and you have some neighbors that are like, well, they're the ones that are going to protect us. That's what their job is, and that's and when something happens in my community, I need someone to show up and protect me. And then others are saying, hey, no, we don't need police to do that. The community can do that. We don't, right? So they're really hard conversations. And so institutions like especially higher ed, bringing data, bringing resources to that space where we can hold those two pictures together and help community make informed decisions. I also think when you're talking about higher ed and things like that, pointing to models like ours, pointing to models that are community-led, that are community engaged. As we know, a lot of institutions in our communities don't have the trust of the community. And so knowing that a higher ed institution is for the community and right, we've seen multiple examples in our community and others where higher ed has caused harm in communities. And so finding ways to support work that's already being done, finding ways through resources, through pointing to models like this with other colleagues, other universities, other places to say, hey, this is what we need to be doing and this is what we need to be supporting, I think is a way to focus on that. And then to the extent that it's possible, bringing, writing, we co-wrote some grants with VCU on some of the work, some community-led work. And so thinking about those kinds of ways to bring resources to the community and supporting and pointing to models like this, I think are ways that higher ed can support community-led work. And then another question we had was, as you all are thinking of questions, is how can companies transition to community ownership after initial investment from private capital? I think I understand this question, and if the person who wrote this question is here, feel free to elaborate a little bit. But I think thinking about ways, so like I would recommend our community voice blueprint is online and free for anyone to use and download and to send us questions about. I really do think that the model that we have put out there, and the model that we practice every day, and the model that we have tried to make available to anyone who needs it and wants it, is a model that can be used at any stage in the process of an organization or a space. You know, it takes a strong pivot if you've been around a long time and you're trying to move an organization from kind of a more organization heavy model to a community-led model. That takes a strong pivot, that takes a lot of buy-in and investment from the people that are a part of the organization. But I do think that finding ways to use community-led models as the foundation for any change, any investment, anything that you're doing does feel like a way that companies and people with private capital can support the work. But if I didn't quite get that question right, please feel free to elaborate on that. And the last question that we had beforehand, and then I'll switch to y'all having questions now, is I'm curious to understand what community sharing and community owning business models could look like, and if we've seen any examples of this. I think, so I think there's lots of ways to kind of start here, but I think the first answer to this question is, if you're thinking about trying to figure out what the community wants when it comes to like businesses in a community or community ownership of that business, start by just going and finding the leaders in the community. And so one of the trainings that we do, our Get to Work training, just listening to what people are saying they need and want in the community. Because if you want to start a business or have a community ownership model, you have to first know what people are interested in doing and what people will be on board for. So I would recommend not going into a community and saying, hey, you know, we're here, we have this model, we want to try to like apply it to this community. What do y'all, you know, here you go. But start with like, you know, going to some civic association meetings, understanding who the leaders in the community are, sitting down and talking through what kinds of models that they're interested in. And then, like, I know in Charlottesville, there was like a kind of a social impact group where there was a laundromat in the community that the community members had some ownership of. I think it's called the Orange Dot Project. You can look it up. I think it is a thing that exists in the world where you can kind of look up. It's like a business owning and sharing model that they did in Charlottesville. But that there are some ways to do that and to think about how you can have community ownership when it comes to businesses. But if you're also thinking about just like, how can a business be in support of the community, start with just listening to what the community is saying, go to civic association meetings, meet with the leaders in the community, and start to understand what that looks like. And we do have a training that we offer that talks about kind of how to build that kind of relationships with communities. So those were the questions that came in beforehand, but love to kind of hear y'all's thoughts and questions now about like what y'all have experienced in community engagement and troubles that you've run into or successes that you've had.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, this is Christine Fusilier. I'm in Virginia. I work with Bryan and Stratton College. And what we've done is we have merged a partnership with Hopewell Elementary Schools to provide them with tutors to help the knowledge gap between their, I want to say, 3rd and 4th graders in math and reading. So it started off as they approached us because, quite frankly, they had COVID funds they had to use, and they were sharing with us about the knowledge gap that they saw. So in turn, we have a tutoring program for our college students, and we were extending that to them for the elementary school students. So that was 2 years ago. And what they found is there was a huge boost in not only morale, but connection with the tutors that helped the teachers in the classrooms, that improved the students' performance and their attendance. So they requested that we do it again for a year 2. And we just wrapped that year up. And they found funds through grants to help support that. But we found that not only it was some of it is very intangible, but they saw a huge difference in the students opening up, the students being able to hear from another voice, if you will. But they were there's some progression that the teachers saw in each student that they were teaching. So we reached out to the community because we want to make sure that we're connected with the community and our partnerships. And because we have the partnership with Hopewell High Schools, there was a connection for the Hopewell Elementary Schools, which afforded us the opportunity for us to get involved on that level and help them with that. And we're expecting to continue the partnership for the next year coming up as well.
That's amazing. That it sounds like y'all have really tapped into a community need and being responsive to, the school system and saying, hey, we're willing to do what y'all need us to do. And then, connecting them to that sounds great. Was there any kind of bumps in the road that you're kind of thinking like in year 2, we want to avoid these things that have come up?
Well, initially, because it was such a quick request, our turnaround time was very a short window to bring in people. So we brought in tutors that we were not as familiar with. And the process was very sticky in the beginning because the teachers were stressed. COVID was still underway as far as the mandates that they had. So the teachers in the schools were stressed. So it seemed like we were adding an additional job for them to kind of manage, or a team for them to manage. But we were able to work through that. And then the second time, we were very intentional about who we hired and who we placed. We were working with 3 of their elementary schools. And who we placed in what schools, and that we had enough to cover all of the classes. So as the year 2 was so much more smoother, and we had a better interaction, like me and the superintendent partnered much closer together, because it wasn't like we were just deploying tutors to them. It was us helping train the tutors. We put in a training program for the tutors, because sometimes college level, we know college level is a lot different than elementary level. So we provided a training program for the tutors and continual touch bases with them. And the tutors, although they weren't initially working for Bryan and Stratton, we had them connected with us. So once they were like doing the, what do they call it, intermissions, we redeployed the tutors back to Bryan and Stratton to help our students as well. So it was a win-win for everyone all around. The second year went way much better.
Much smoother. Yeah, like I would say, like, I love the learnings that y'all had from that space, but thinking about like, okay, if we're going into school, who is the community of the school, right? And it sounds like y'all kind of work through those things a little bit, but it's like, who's the community of the school? Like the teachers, the students, right? The parents. The community around the school, like, whatever, civic association. So having conversations with those people to kind of see those distinct groups, to see, hey, what do you need from a program like this? What do you need from a program, right? Like, and getting that, learning that knowledge first, and then stepping into a program. And it's something which you described, is something that we hear a lot, where there's a request and it needs to be met, and it needs to be quick, and it needs to turn around fast. And there's not time for a lot of community engagement. There's not time for a lot of understanding what people need and want. And then you run into bumps in the road, and in some places it kills the whole thing. But it sounds like you all held on and fought through it and worked through those bumps. But those are the kinds of things that if we were partnering with you to like recommend something like that for this process, it'd be, start with like figuring out who the distinct community is for a program like this, and then understanding from them what they need and want in that space.
Yeah.
That feels like a way to kind of have that community engaged lens as you move into spaces like that.
Yeah, it was more like moving from a reactive mode to a
Right.
proactive mode. 'Cause we
Absolutely.
were very reactive
Absolutely.
in the beginning. So
Absolutely.
it's good. It's working out really well. So we're very proud of that program.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts or questions or ideas about this process or troubleshooting that you all have to offer?
I have a question,
Yeah,
or
thank
just,
you.
and can be open to anyone on the call, but, at TCI, we're really focused on numbers and data and analytics and, 1.4 million Virginians might be affected by this, or
Mhm.
22,000, and all of those numbers end up, they are people, right? They are Virginians, they are us. And so
Mhm.
just trying to, we know that when working with legislators and folks that can really change the needle on things, that it's important to lift stories that associate to those numbers, and that
Mhm.
um, those are the things that like pull on heartstrings and kind of can gather people towards a certain common goal. But
Mhm.
I just, as we do that, just thinking about ideas on how to make sure that we're doing that authentically and that we're not just exploiting people's experience, and really we have the goal of making sure that people understand how laws and things affect people, but like, how do we do that in a way that that's dignified, and that doesn't like re-traumatize folks and things like that. So
Mhm.
any thoughts on that would be great.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and something I think we struggle with a lot in making sure that we're being authentic in the space. I think a couple things come to mind, but again, to Amy's point, anyone who has had experience in this space, feel free to jump in. But for us, what I think a couple of things come to mind. One is, to your point about the education of the space, is like what the space is, being really clear with people. Like, part of the goal is to change legislators' minds, and the only way that we can do that is to make sure that these stories. So just being really upfront and honest about what the purpose of the conversations are and where we're going with it, and what the outcomes are going to be. Because I do think that a lot of times we go into, especially spaces like when we're thinking about legislative spaces, and people are unsure of like how it's going to go. And one of the things that we talk about a lot when we talk about power building in our communities is that very conversation around how long it takes to get to where we need to go. Because I think sometimes people feel like, if I tell my story, if I engage in this space, then something is going to change. And the reality is that more times the storytelling and bringing people together to move something is a long-term thing. And there's also so much value in, and this is one of the things that was kind of on the list to talk about, there's so much value in people seeing that their stories and their situations are not personal failings. So like, I think a lot of times in the building of a community, and the building of community voice, and the building of bringing people together, part of the value in that, and this is kind of an express outcome that we talk about, part of the value in that, of the storytelling aspect of this, even if we're trying to get a thing changed with city council or something, right? But part of the value of it is helping people understand, because I think a lot of times when we think about, an issue, for instance, affordable housing, which is something we're working on all the time, affordable housing, right? A lot of times people feel isolated in this experience of like, hey, it's my personal failing. The reason I can't afford a house, or the reason I can't, my family, whatever, it's I've done something wrong. I'm not working hard enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not whatever the thing is. But having other people in the room saying, oh no, I've had that problem too. And I've had that problem too. And I've had that problem too. it brings some like solidarity to the moment. And that is an expressed outcome that people need to understand, that like the issue might not change right away. The thing that we're trying to do might, that's going to be a long road, but having community around this issue, around what we're doing, I think that's something to like outline to people as you're stepping into this space, is like, this is not about exploitation. This is about us being able to connect as community around these issues that have been plaguing our communities forever. And that's really part of what we're trying to do, and in this process of engagement. And so I think that's one really, really big thing, is like just being really clear on what it is we're trying to do, and understanding that before you go to people and ask them to join and have stories and engage. Yeah, I think that's a really big part of it. And I do think that like that gives people a sense of like, oh, how long, this is going to take a long time. We're not going to be, I have been working on, an affordable housing trust fund in my previous job for, 5 or 6 years. My predecessor worked on it for 5 or 6 years, and 15 years later we're still fighting for affordable housing trust fund in the city of Richmond, and the people that have been involved in that fight have been in it for those 15 years, and they know that it's a long road, but the part of the journey, part of the engagement, is the connection that they make along the road is like, oh, this is not my personal failing, this is something that is a systemic issue, and people understanding that and engaging with that feels like a way to help people understand, like, this is not about exploitation, this is about community and building a story for what we're trying to do as a community and what we're trying to change. Does that make sense? And is that like a helpful response?
So helpful. Thank you so much, Leah. That's great. Thank you.
Oh, I have one thing to add about
Yeah,
it.
go for it.
I think also consent is really important when and this like might seem like a very obvious thing to folks, but if you say you're going to use someone's story for one thing, or they've told you a story and you're like, hey, that story would be great in this other thing that we're doing, don't just take that story and use it for that other thing. Make sure that you ask them and say exactly what it's going to be used for, so that they really have control over their own narrative, because a lot of times, especially in fundraising, it's really easy to be like, oh yeah, this person told this really great story that's going to get us a ton of funds, but they didn't tell you that story in that context. And so it's really important to make sure, if you do want to continue to work with that person or use that story or have them tell that story again, that you're really upfront and honest about what you're going to be doing with it and where it's going to go and who might see it. That's the only thing I would add. Yeah,
I think that's great. Thank you, Dana. Any other questions or thoughts about kind of troubleshooting ideas, experiences that y'all have, successes or things that you feel like you want to do better?
I have a question.
Sure.
Hey, good to see y'all.
Yeah.
So in my role now, I am trying to help cities across the country apply for all of this federal funding that is newly available, particularly to implement environmental related projects. Yay, Amy. And one of the things that I keep coming up against, because I'm telling the folks we're helping, like, start with community priorities, don't just apply for funding and like implement the government's projects willy-nilly, that kind of thing. And something I keep coming up against and would love anyone's thoughts on is that a lot of these grants that are coming down from the federal government have really short timelines. So like, I'm working on a couple right now that are due at the end of the month, which is insane. And our cities are saying, like, I would love to engage community, but we know that it takes a lot longer than we have for developing this grant proposal. How can we do that? How can we, like, equitably and respectfully engage community when we really want this money and we have a month to pull together like some details. So any thoughts? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, that is one of the hardest kind of things that we've faced in our work, is primarily with funders, and the federal government is one of the hardest funders to move. I can tell you one success story that maybe is a blueprint to kind of think about how to do some of these things differently. And it's a small kind of change. So along with Amy and many others in the community, Happily Natural Day, Groundwork RVA, we're a part of a grant that we all got in the Science Museum of Virginia. So Southside Relief, when I say Amy, I mean Southside Relief. From NOAA, from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association or something like that. So it's a big federal grant that we got. And obviously, you know about this, Brianne. And one of the things when we first started that process that felt really important to us is not to be reimbursed for them. So the federal government process is often, it's a reimbursement, like you do the work and then they reimburse you for the work. And our kind of response to that was like, that's not fair, that's not just, that's not equitable for communities to have to put up money that they may or may not have, and especially nonprofits. If you want to engage with nonprofits of color, if you want to engage that are run by people of color, like the capital is often not there for us to be able to do work and then, you know, get paid for it who knows how long later. So this is not exactly what you're talking about, but it's like a process thing that we're trying to kind of address. And one of the things that we said or very early on when we were talking about being a part of that grant process, when we were engaging with the Science Museum on it, was like, that's not going to work for us. Like the whole reimbursement process, that process is just not going to work for us. And so the Science Museum, Jeremy Hoffman, to be specific, who was the chief scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia at the time, you know, argued that on our behalf and said, hey, listen, this isn't going to work for us, and it's not going to work for the communities, for this group of nonprofits that we're working with, that, you know, may not have that kind of capital to do the work and then get reimbursed for it. And honestly, they changed their policy, and so we get those checks up front and do the work, and right. And so I do think that the advocating for those changes. So like, I know, like if you have this turnaround and you've got so much work, but like organizations and at your level, Brianne, and others that you can bring in. So think about like who, you know, other people, other organizations, other funders or other nonprofits that can like advocate with you to say, hey, now it's a long-term solution. This is not a like right now thing, but it is a way to start to push for those kinds of changes to those rules that say like, hey, we need this on a 12-month timeline. We need, right, to expand that. We've had other stories with local foundations that are, you know, they're a little bit more flexible than the federal government and have a little bit more wiggle room, where we have said to them, hey, the timeline that you've given this grant, the amount that you're giving for this grant is not enough to do the work that we need to do. This is longer work. This is work that is going to need more time than what you're offering. And advocating for that and just saying, and I think sometimes we feel like when we're talking to these powerful entities, we don't have a voice at all at the table. And sometimes just saying those things and being really clear about them and saying them early and often and over and over and over again can change the way that they think about it and say, oh, okay, well, maybe. And so we've had that situation, one of our programs, our ARCA program, where I will give credit where credit is due. Richmond Memorial Health Foundation was a funder of that program, and you know, it was a wonderful program. They saw it as their kind of a gold star program for you know, the work that we were trying to do. But the second year of that program, we said, listen, as much as you loved what we did, it was taxing for our staff. It was taxing for us to be able to do what you're asking for with this amount of money and on this timeline. So then the next year, again, credit to them for listening to us and hearing what we were saying. They changed the timeline, they changed the amount of money, and that didn't just apply to us as the organization, as one organization, that applied to everyone who got that money that year and ever, right? So those kinds of advocating for those kinds of changes and finding others who can continue to voice that. I do think on the local level, we're seeing some of those changes with local grant partners. On the federal level, it's a little harder, but the NOAA grant is an example of how that can happen and how that can be successful. So that's one example, but I know that's one of the hardest spaces to be in, and to add that to your plate as you're trying to get these grants done and trying to work with communities to get them done is a lot. But it also is one of those things that is one of the biggest changes, especially in national and federal grants that organizations on the ground really need. We need those kinds of changes to do the work effectively. And so to the extent that people at your level can start to advocate for those changes, I think is really important. So we have about 4 minutes left. Veronica, I see your hand if you want to be our last question or comment, and then I'll throw it back to Flo to end us out today.
At this time, my dog is here. Sorry, I'm going to put in the text. Basically, thank you for sharing, being so honest with the process. I'm Veronica Reed, and I'm the director of the Leadership Academy. I just wanted to piggyback on the importance of including people. I mean, it sounds very simple. It was a different context. I do a lot of work with the mental health community. So I had a really cool project where we would highlight the stories of immigrants, explain the things thoroughly, had all the papers, and people, when we had all the fundings, everything ready, the cameras and ready, a person, a Hispanic immigrant, changed their mind. So it's incredibly, I mean, simple, but easy to overlook. Where sometimes we have grants for certain purpose, like this was a very time crunch thing. We had immigration, a story was really beautiful. Everybody was on board. But one of the main stories, due to different barriers, it changed their minds, and people, it's incredibly tough to recover from that. But people have the right to change their minds, and it's good to have plan B, plan C, and be flexible and empathic towards those things that are difficult to overlook, right? So thank you for sharing that, right?
Yeah, that's really important. I think that's I think one of the biggest ways that we keep community engaged is by spending a lot of time with people. So we're doing one-to-ones with people on a regular basis. We're calling and checking on them, even if it has nothing to do with the work that we're trying to do with them, just making sure that they're okay, and having that close context will give you information about like where they are in their journey, and if they do need to change their mind or that something does come up, but having that deep relationship gives you the space to navigate and change and to move based on what the community needs, and even sometimes based on hard changes and things that you're like, man, I wish that didn't happen, but I understand it because I'm in relationship with these people and with this community, and we can react to what they need and want. So thank you for that. Flo, I'll turn it over to you to end us out. And then, thank y'all so much for being with us today and having this really rich conversation. I appreciate it. Stay tuned for our next First Wednesday's conversation coming up in June.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, thank you all so much for attending. This has been incredible to spend this time with you all and learn together. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our training and coaching program. I believe there's a slide, but maybe I'm not sure. Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you so much. Oh, and that's me with makeup on. So we do have, as a lot of you know, we do have a whole kind of department, a whole program of training and coaching. The training that we provide organizations is very much aligned with the conversation that we had today. We provide training that provides you with the skills and the basic kind of tools to start an equitable development, an equity and community engagement practice in your organization. We can go over the blueprint kind of and seeing ways to apply it. And then we have a further by Brienne. And then we have a stronger kind of training that will help us really hone those skills when it comes to community engagement. So these are options for all of us. We're also working on trainings that are coming very soon for our equitable development scorecard, which is just a way to hold developers accountable in our when in spaces that are being rapidly developed. And we also have racial equity training available for organizations at this time. So we would love to hear from you. We also provide coaching in kind of one-on-one with organizations to help them move through the journey of equity, right? We have a process called the organizational equity improvement process that we go through with organizations. And so if in any of these areas we can help you, there's, oh, my email's not there, but I'm going to add it to the chat right now. Please email me and we can have a one-on-one conversation in more depth about how we can support your organization in this journey. And I'm going to add the email right now. So please feel free to email me if you need to, or Dana, who's got an email from.
Thank y'all so much. Have a great day.